The Kithaeron Military Academy orbited Nexus Prime's third moon like a chrome tick on a gas giant's backside, which was probably the most honest metaphor anyone had used to describe higher education in centuries. Inside its sterile corridors, the galaxy's most promising young killers gathered to learn the fine art of interspecies warfare from beings who had never actually been shot at by anything more dangerous than a particularly aggressive audit. Commander Vex Thule watched the new arrivals through his office's reinforced viewport, his 4 eyes tracking each species with the detached interest of someone cataloging insects. The Zephyrians floated in their environmental bubbles, naturally translucent, and convinced their ethereal nature made them superior warriors. The Krathan delegation stomped around in powered exoskeletons, their beetle-like carapaces gleaming with fresh military polish. Even the Silicate Collective had sent a representative, a walking crystal formation that hummed with barely contained electromagnetic fury. "Another stellar crop of galactic nobility," Vex Thule muttered, his mandibles clicking in what passed for amusement among his species. "I wonder which one will wash out first." The docking bay's atmospheric processors chimed as another transport sealed against the station's hull. Through the viewing port, Vex Thule watched a lone figure emerge, bipedal, unremarkable in stature, carrying what appeared to be a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. The human had arrived. In the Academy's central armory, weapons displays lined the walls like shrines to technological superiority. Plasma rifles hummed with contained stellar fire. Neural disruptors gleamed with the promise of scrambled synapses. Gravitometric weapons sat in their cradles like sleeping gods of physics. The alien cadets moved through the space with reverent appreciation, their various appendages hovering near their chosen instruments of destruction. Kex 9, the Krathan delegation's prime specimen, hefted a molecular dissociator with obvious relish. Over 97% of viewers here are watching without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button right now and join the journey. Every click helps us grow stronger, and you'll never miss the next epic story. 15,000 particle interactions per second, he announced to nobody in particular, his voice booming through his suit's external speakers. Target dissolution guaranteed at ranges exceeding 4 kilometers. The Zephyrian representative, Whisper of Distant Thunder, drifted closer to examine a quantum cascade launcher. Elegant. The Terran conflicts of the last millennium could have been resolved with a dozen of these. Could have been, agreed Lattice Prime, the silicate's crystalline form refracting the armory's lighting into prismatic patterns. Had humans possessed the wisdom to transcend their primitive metallurgy? Conversations paused as the human entered the armory. He walked with an easy gait that suggested either supreme confidence or complete ignorance of social dynamics. Both possibilities seemed equally unlikely, given humanity's reputation for anxious overcompensation. The human stopped before an empty weapon rack, unslung his canvas bag, and withdrew what could only be described as a museum piece. The silence that followed had weight. "Is that," Kex 9 began, his suit's voice modulator struggling with what might have been laughter, "carved from actual stone?" The human hefted the weapon, if it deserved such a term, with practiced ease. The thing was clearly ancient, its wooden handle worn smooth by countless hands, its stone head dark with age, and what might charitably be called character. Primitive etchings covered its surface, the kind of decorative nonsense that predated actual engineering. "Granite and ironwood," the human replied, his voice carrying none of the shame that circumstances clearly warranted. "Family heirloom?" Whisper of Distant Thunder's laugh sounded like wind through crystal chimes. "A family heirloom. How wonderfully quaint. I suppose your ancestors used it to hunt mastodons?" among other things. The response hung in the air with uncomfortable ambiguity. The alien cadets exchanged glances, or whatever their respective species used to convey mutual bewilderment. Lattice Prime's form pulsed with what registered as amusement across the electromagnetic spectrum. Other things. How delightfully vague. Perhaps it was used for agriculture, splitting kindling, ceremonial fruit preparation. The humans and their ceremonies, added Kex 9, always attributing mystical significance to basic tool usage. Next, he'll tell us it contains the spirits of his ancestors. Actually, please, interrupted Whisper of Distant Thunder, spare us the mythology. We're here to study advanced combat applications, not primitive belief systems. The human shrugged and placed the stone axe in his assigned rack, where it looked like exactly what it was. A prehistoric anachronism surrounded by weapons that could crack planets. The contrast was so absurd it approached performance art. Remarkable, murmured another cadet, a Vorthon whose scaled hide rippled with chromatic patterns, indicating what their species considered profound thought. The human delegation sends their most primitive technology to our most advanced academy. The irony is almost too perfect. Perhaps it's a statement, suggested Kex 9. A deliberate commentary on the futility of technological progress. Or, added Lattice Prime, evidence that humans remain as developmentally arrested as our xenobiologists have long suspected. The conversation devolved into the kind of intellectual masturbation that passed for discourse among young adults, convinced they were the first to discover obvious truths. The human stood quietly among them, neither defending his choice nor offering explanation, which only fueled their certainty that they were witnessing something pathetic. Commander Vex Thule chose that moment to enter the armory, his presence immediately commanding attention. His species had been waging wars when most of these civilizations were still figuring out fire, and it showed in the way he moved, economically, purposefully, like violence contained in a uniform. Weapons familiarization is complete, he announced, his compound eyes sweeping across the assembled cadets. Tomorrow we begin survival scenarios. Each of you will face combat simulations designed to test your chosen armament's effectiveness under extreme conditions. His gaze lingered on the human's weapon rack. All weapons, he continued, regardless of their apparent sophistication. The implied challenge settled over the room like atmospheric pressure before a storm. The alien cadets straightened, their various physiologies radiating anticipation. This would be educational, watching primitive human technology fail against properly engineered solutions. Dismissed, Vex Thule commanded. As the cadets filed out, their conversations buzzed with speculation about the coming demonstrations. Bets were already being placed, odds calculated, entertainment anticipated. The human lingered, running one finger along his weapon's ancient handle. Interesting choice, Vex Thule observed once they were alone. Is it? The human asked. For someone carrying a stone axe to a weapons academy, you seem remarkably calm. Should I be nervous? Vex Thule's mandibles clicked again. Definitely amusement this time. That depends entirely on what you know that they don't. The human met his gaze with eyes that held depths the commander hadn't expected. Everything has a history, Commander, even stones. Indeed. Vex Thule turned towards the exit, then paused. Fair warning, tomorrow's simulations have a 97% failure rate. Most cadets don't survive their first encounter. Most cadets, the human replied, aren't carrying family heirlooms. After he left, the armory fell quiet except for the gentle hum of containment fields around weapons that could level cities. In its rack, the stone axe sat motionless, dark, primitive, and utterly unremarkable. Which, as any historian of human conflicts could have warned them, was precisely when human weapons were most dangerous. The Academy's mess hall operated on the principle that, if you could digest it, it probably wouldn't kill you. A philosophy that had resulted in a culinary experience resembling a chemistry experiment gone horribly right. The various species clustered around tables designed to accommodate everything from the Zephyrians' floating digestive processes to the Krathens' industrial-strength nutrient injection systems. Kex 9 dominated the central table, his exoskeleton's bulk forcing smaller cadets to relocate their meals. "I've been researching human military history," he announced, stabbing at his protein synthesis cube with unnecessary violence. "Fascinating stuff. They spent millennia hitting each other with rocks tied to sticks." "Evolution is a curious beast," observed Whisper of Distant Thunder, whose meal consisted of suspended atmospheric particles that somehow qualified as nourishment. "Most species eventually transcend their violent origins. Humans appear to have embraced theirs." 3 tables away, the human sat alone, methodically consuming what appeared to be actual organic matter, a dietary choice that reinforced every stereotype about primitive biological needs. His stone axe lay beside his tray, as if he expected someone to steal a museum exhibit. "The weapon predates their industrial revolution by millennia," continued Lattice Prime, whose crystalline form required no sustenance but seemed to enjoy the conversation. "I accessed their historical databases. Similar tools were used for everything from warfare to woodworking to ritualistic dismemberment." "Ritualistic dismemberment?" The Vorthon cadets' chromatic scales shifted to deep purple, their species' equivalent of morbid fascination. How wonderfully barbaric. "Oh, it gets better," Kex 9's speakers crackled with what passed for glee. They also used them for something called execution ceremonies, public spectacles where they separated criminals from their heads. The table fell silent as various alien physiologies processed this information through their respective moral frameworks. The concept of public violence as entertainment struck most of them as profoundly disturbing, which said something, considering several of their homeworlds still practiced formalized dueling. "And this is what he brings to combat our quantum weaponry," murmured Whisper of Distant Thunder. "The psychological implications alone suggest deep cultural pathology." Across the mess hall, their human classmate continued eating with apparent indifference to the conversation he certainly could hear. His posture suggested either supreme confidence or complete resignation, both equally puzzling responses to social ostracism. "Perhaps," suggested the Vorthon, "we should view this as educational opportunity, a chance to observe primitive combat methodology in controlled conditions." "Like a living museum exhibit," agreed Lattice Prime. "Though I question the Academy's decision to include such anachronistic elements in serious military training." The discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Wing Commander Zal Neth, whose species had evolved from aerial predators and retained an unfortunate tendency to perch on furniture. She settled atop a chair back with casual grace, her feathered crest indicating mild amusement. "Discussing tomorrow's entertainment, I see," she said, her voice carrying the musical quality that made her species natural diplomats and terrifying interrogators. "The betting pools have reached impressive levels." "Betting pools?" Kex 9's external speakers conveyed genuine interest. "Current odds place the human's survival at approximately 300 to 1 against." Zalneth preened one wing with deliberate casualness. "Several cadets have wagered their semester allowances on the spectacle lasting less than 30 seconds. 30 seconds seems generous," observed Whisper of Distant Thunder. "How long does it take plasma fire to melt stone?" "Depends on the stone," came a voice from behind them. The alien cadets turned to find the human standing beside their table, his meal tray balanced in one hand, the stone axe in the other. His approach had been completely silent. a detail that registered somewhere between impressive and unsettling. "I beg your pardon?" Lattice Prime's electromagnetic field flickered with surprise. "You asked about plasma fire melting stone," the human replied conversationally. "The answer depends on the stone. Granite has a melting point of roughly 1,300 degrees Celsius. Plasma weapons typically operate at temperatures exceeding 10,000 degrees. So, to answer your question, not long at all. The silence that followed carried the weight of a dozen species trying to determine whether they'd been insulted or educated. "How scientifically precise," Zalneth managed, her crest flattening against her skull. "I find precision useful," the human said, then looked directly at Kex 9. "For instance, your molecular dissociator operates by destabilizing atomic bonds through targeted particle bombardment. Impressive range, but the energy consumption requires a 3-second charging cycle between shots. That's plenty of time to close distance in close-quarters combat." Kex 9's exoskeleton seemed to deflate slightly. "You've been researching our weapons." "I research everything. Your quantum cascade launcher," he nodded toward Whisper of Distant Thunder, "creates beautiful spatial distortions but struggles with rapid target acquisition. And your electromagnetic projection system," this directed at Lattice Prime, "works wonderfully against electronic targets but has limited effectiveness against non-conductive materials." The alien cadets exchanged glances that conveyed mutual unease. This wasn't the response they'd expected from someone carrying a Stone Age weapon. "Very thorough," admitted the Vorthan, scales shifting to cautious yellow. "Though I failed to see how such knowledge helps when your own weapon lacks any technological sophistication whatsoever." "Sophistication is subjective," the human replied. "This axe has killed more enemies than all your advanced weapons combined." "Historically speaking," Kex 9 protested, "that's hardly a fair comparison. Primitive weapons saw extensive use simply because nothing else was available." "True," the human agreed, "but history has a way of repeating itself." With that cryptic observation, he walked away, leaving the alien cadets staring after him with expressions ranging from confusion to outright concern. "Well," Whisper of Distant Thunder said eventually, "that was either very brave or completely insane." "With humans," Wing Commander Zalneth observed, watching the retreating figure, "those categories often overlap." The conversation resumed, but with noticeably less enthusiasm. The humans' casual knowledge of their weapon specifications had introduced an uncomfortable variable into what should have been a simple equation. Advanced technology defeats primitive tools. End of story. Several hours later, the Academy's holographic training center hummed with activity as cadets ran preliminary combat simulations. The facility could generate virtually any environment, from asteroid mining facilities to dense jungle worlds, complete with hostile wildlife and environmental hazards. Kex 9 stood before a shimmering portal displaying a rocky canyon system. His molecular dissociator whined as it charged, then released a beam that carved through simulated stone like a hot knife through butter. The target drones never stood a chance. "Excellent precision," called Instructor Thelvex, a grizzled veteran whose species had been perfecting warfare since before most galaxies had finished forming. "Remember to compensate for gravitational variations in actual combat conditions." At the adjacent station, Whisper of Distant Thunder demonstrated the quantum cascade launcher's ability to fold space around targets, effectively crushing enemies within their own twisted dimensions. The effect was both beautiful and horrifying, exactly the kind of aesthetic violence that impressed military instructors. Lattice Prime's electromagnetic projection system proved equally devastating, turning the training chamber into a light show of crackling energy that reduced everything in its path to ionized particles. "Impressive displays," Thelvex noted, making marks on his evaluation tablet. "Tomorrow's scenarios will provide more challenging opposition." The human waited patiently for his turn, stone axe resting across his shoulders like a farmer's tool rather than a weapon of war. The contrast with his classmates' high-tech demonstrations was almost comical. "Your turn," Thelvex announced with barely concealed skepticism. The human stepped toward the holographic portal, then paused. "What parameters should I expect?" "Standard urban combat scenario. Multiple hostile targets, limited visibility, environmental hazards. Same conditions as everyone else." "Understood." The human walked through the portal and vanished into a simulation of a war-torn cityscape. Through the viewing screens, the alien cadets watched him move through rubble-strewn streets with surprising grace, his primitive weapon held in a ready position that suggested actual training. The first simulated enemies appeared, armed drones with plasma weapons identical to modern military hardware. The human dropped behind cover as energy bolts scorched the air where he'd been standing. "This should be over quickly," muttered Kex 9. The human emerged from cover, moving in a zigzag pattern that made him difficult to target. A drone swooped low, weapons charging, and he swung the stone axe in a wide arc. The impact sent electromagnetic feedback cascading through the training system's sensors. "What just happened?" Whisper of distant thunder pressed against the viewing screen. Instructor Thelvex was studying his readouts with obvious confusion. The simulation registered a massive energy discharge. "But that's impossible. It's just a stone axe." On screen, the human continued moving through the urban environment, and each swing of his primitive weapon produced effects that defied every known law of physics the alien cadets thought they understood. The betting odds, it seemed, might require some adjustment. The electromagnetic cascade that erupted from the human's weapon turned the training center's monitoring systems into expensive paperweights. Emergency protocols engaged as containment fields struggled to process energy readings that shouldn't exist outside a stellar core. Instructor Thelvex's mandibles ground together, a sound his species made when confronting something that violated basic reality. "Shut down the simulation." "I'm trying," replied Technician Morcal, her tentacles dancing across control interfaces with increasing desperation. "The system won't respond. Whatever that weapon is doing, it's overriding our containment protocols." Through the viewing screens, they watched the human navigate the simulated cityscape, while reality bent around him. Each swing of the stone axe carved through space itself, leaving trails of distorted light that made the quantum cascade launcher look like a children's toy. "This is impossible," breathed Whisper of distant thunder, her gaseous form condensing with shock. "Stone doesn't generate quantum fields." "Unless it isn't stone," suggested Lattice Prime, her crystalline structure resonating with harmonics that registered as profound unease. The simulation's enemy drones adapted their tactics, approaching from multiple vectors with coordinated fire patterns. The human responded by spinning the axe above his head in movements that seemed almost ritualistic, until the weapon began to sing. The sound defied classification. It wasn't mechanical hum or energy discharge, but something deeper, as if the universe itself was clearing its throat. Sympathetic vibrations ran through the Academy's superstructure, causing lights to flicker and artificial gravity to stutter. "By the void," whispered Wing Commander Zal Neth, her feathers standing on end. "It's harmonizing with space-time." Kex 9's exoskeleton registered increasing radiation levels. "Impossible. Primitive cultures don't develop dimensional manipulation technology." "Who says they developed it?" The human's voice carried clearly through the communication system, even though he appeared focused on combat. "Maybe they inherited it." In the simulation, 3 drones converged on his position simultaneously. The human planted his feet, raised the axe, and brought it down in a motion that split more than air. The weapon's edge traced a line through three-dimensional space that somehow connected distant points, allowing him to strike all three targets at once, despite them being positioned dozens of meters apart. Spatial folding, Technician Morcal reported unnecessarily. He's cutting through dimensional barriers. That's not possible with handheld weapons, protested the Vorthon cadet, scales cycling through colors that indicated species-wide existential crisis. The power requirements alone would necessitate a starship's reactor core. The human paused in his assault, looking directly at the viewing screen as if he could see through the simulation's barriers. You're thinking too small. Power doesn't come from size. It comes from understanding. Another wave of enemies materialized, these equipped with energy shields and tactical coordination algorithms. They spread out, established overlapping fields of fire, and began methodically reducing the humans' available cover. Standard doctrine suggested retreat or surrender. The human chose neither. Instead, he planted the axe's handle against the ground and spoke a single word in a language that predated galactic civilization by millennia. The weapon responded by transforming its immediate environment into something that made physicists weep. Gravity reversed in localized pockets. Time dilated around specific coordinates. The fundamental forces that held reality together became suggestions rather than laws. He's weaponizing physics, Instructor Thelvex observed, with the detached fascination of someone watching their worldview collapse. The axe isn't just cutting through space, it's editing the universe's source code. The enemy drones found themselves caught in impossible situations, flying upward through reversed gravity while experiencing time at half speed, or discovering that their energy weapons now fired backward through folded space to strike themselves. Within minutes, the supposedly overwhelming force had been reduced to confused scrap metal. Simulation complete, announced the training center's automated systems with suspicious cheer. All objectives achieved. Time elapsed. 4 minutes, 37 seconds. The human emerged from the portal looking exactly as he had entered. Calm, unremarkable, carrying a stone axe that now radiated enough residual energy to power a small moon. Silence filled the observation deck like a physical presence. The alien cadets stared at their human classmate with expressions ranging from awe to terror, to the kind of intellectual vertigo that comes from discovering everything you believed was wrong. Well, said Wing Commander Zal Neth eventually, that was educational. Educational is one word for it, agreed Kex 9, his voice lacking its usual bombast. Terrifying is another. The human approached the viewing screen, his footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. You wanted to see what a primitive weapon could do. Are you satisfied with the demonstration? What is that thing? Demanded Lattice Prime, her electromagnetic field fluctuating wildly. That's not stone. That's not wood. That's not anything. That should exist. It's exactly what I said it was, the human replied. A family heirloom. My ancestors have been carrying it for longer than your species have been sentient. Your ancestors, repeated Whisper of Distant Thunder slowly, possessed dimensional manipulation technology when they were still using stone tools? Who says we ever stopped using stone tools? The human's smile held depths that made stellar cartographers nervous. We just got better at choosing which stones to use. Instructor Thelvex stepped forward, his military bearing intact despite the philosophical earthquake occurring around him. That weapon represents technology beyond anything in our current arsenal. Where did humans acquire such capabilities? We didn't acquire them, the human said simply. We made them. Then we buried them. Then we forgot how to make more. Then we remembered why we buried them in the first place. The implications hung in the recycled air like a challenge to the fundamental assumptions of galactic civilization. Every species present had built their identity around technological superiority, progressive advancement, and the steady march toward greater sophistication. The idea that someone had possessed ultimate weapons and chosen to abandon them violated every principle of rational development. "You're saying," Kex-9 managed, "that humans deliberately regressed? That you gave up dimensional manipulation in favor of what? Agriculture?" "Philosophy," the human corrected. "The universe is full of species that can build weapons capable of destroying stars. It's much rarer to find ones wise enough to choose not to." "But you brought this one," pointed out the Vorthan, scales settling into confused beige patterns. "I brought one," the human agreed. "Out of millions that remain buried, sometimes wisdom means knowing when exceptions are necessary." He hefted the axe, its ancient surface reflecting light in patterns that hurt to contemplate directly. "My family has carried this burden for 3,000 years, passing it down through generations with instructions to use it only when facing enemies that threaten more than our lives." "And what threatens more than life?" asked Wing Commander Zalneth. The human looked around the observation deck, meeting each alien gaze with steady eyes that had seen too much history. "The assumption that newer is always better," he said quietly. "The belief that technological advancement equals wisdom. The dangerous certainty that what came before was necessarily primitive." He walked toward the exit, then paused. "Tomorrow's scenarios will be more challenging," the instructor said. "I wonder if any of you will reconsider what weapons you've chosen to carry." After he left, the alien cadets remained frozen in contemplation, staring at the training center's energy readings that still defied rational explanation. Somewhere in the Academy's archives, historical databases quietly began cross-referencing human, mythological references with documented technological capabilities, searching for patterns that everyone had been too sophisticated to notice. The betting pools, meanwhile, had been permanently suspended due to what the bookmakers diplomatically termed unforeseen variables in the probability matrix, which was a polite way of saying that sometimes the house doesn't just lose. Sometimes it discovers it never understood the game being played. The Academy's philosophy department hadn't seen this much activity since the great existential crisis of 2387, when 3 separate species simultaneously discovered their creation myths were plagiarized from the same cosmic jokebook. Now, alien cadets who had spent their lives perfecting the art of superior warfare found themselves queuing outside Professor Neth Rowell's office like pilgrims seeking absolution. Kex-9 arrived first, his exoskeleton's bulk requiring special accommodation as he settled into the reinforced consultation chair. His usual bombastic confidence had been replaced by something approaching humility, a transformation roughly equivalent to watching a supernova learn table manners. "Professor," he began, his voice modulation set to its lowest, most respectful frequency, "I need to understand something that defies my entire conceptual framework." Professor Neth Rowell, whose species had evolved from creatures that spent their lives contemplating the universe's more abstract ironies, gestured with tentacles that suggested infinite patience. "Proceed, though I suspect I know the source of your distress." "The human weapon. Yesterday I witnessed technology that shouldn't exist operated by a species we classified as developmentally primitive. How do I reconcile this with everything we know about progressive civilization?" "Perhaps," the professor suggested gently, "the reconciliation lies in examining what we think we know rather than what we've observed." Down the corridor, whisper of distant thunder drifted through the Academy's historical archives, her gaseous form disturbing dust motes that hadn't moved in decades. The databases she accessed told stories that contradicted every xenological textbook ever published. Humanity's archaeological record revealed a pattern of inexplicable technological gaps, Ancient sites displayed evidence of advanced metallurgy, followed by centuries of apparent regression. Sophisticated astronomical calculations appeared alongside primitive farming tools. Most disturbing of all, every few millennia, entire technological civilizations seemed to voluntarily disappear, leaving behind only scattered artifacts and cryptic warnings. "It's as if they kept starting over," she murmured to herself, the sound like wind through abandoned chambers. But why would any species deliberately abandon technological advantage? 3 levels below, in the Academy's restricted military archives, Lattice Prime interfaced directly with classified databases that documented humanity's recent conflicts. The electromagnetic records painted a picture that made her crystalline structure resonate with frequencies approaching panic. Human military doctrine didn't emphasize technological superiority. Instead, it focused on adaptability, resource conservation, and something the files termed appropriate response escalation. Most tellingly, human weapons development seemed deliberately constrained, as if they were holding back rather than advancing. "They're not behind us," she transmitted to herself in shocked realization. "They're ahead of us." So far ahead that they've circled back to appearing primitive. In the mess hall, the usual species segregation had dissolved into integrated discussion groups that resembled support meetings more than casual dining. Conversations carried the hushed tones typically reserved for funerals or tax audits. "My homeworld's entire military philosophy is based on technological supremacy," admitted the Vorthon cadet, scales cycling through colors that indicated deep philosophical distress. "We measure progress by weapon efficiency, range, destructive capability. But what if we're measuring in the wrong direction?" Wing Commander Zal Neth perched nearby, her predatory instincts struggling with revelations that challenged every hunting strategy her species had developed over millions of years. In nature, the most dangerous predators aren't the ones with the biggest claws. They're the ones smart enough to know when not to use them. "But intelligence should lead to advancement," protested a Krathan engineer whose exoskeleton clinked with each frustrated gesture. "Civilization progresses through technological development. That's the fundamental law of cultural evolution." "Unless," suggested a voice from behind them, "civilization is smart enough to recognize when progress becomes regression." The alien cadets turned to find the human approaching with his meal tray, the stone axe conspicuously absent from his usual ensemble. He sat among them without invitation, a breach of social protocol that somehow felt less like rudeness than long overdue integration. "Where's your weapon?" asked Whisper of Distant Thunder, her form condensing with curiosity. "Resting," the human replied, attacking his synthetic protein with methodical efficiency. "Weapons like that require recovery time between uses. The universe needs to stabilize after extended dimensional manipulation." "Recovery time," repeated Kex-9 slowly. "You mean it has operational limitations?" "Everything has limitations. The trick is understanding them before you need to." The human paused his meal to look around the gathered aliens. "You've been researching, I see." "How did you know?" asked the Vorthan. "Because you're asking different questions. Yesterday you wanted to know how a primitive weapon could be so effective. Today you're wondering why an advanced species would choose primitive weapons." The distinction hung between them like a philosophical chasm that had suddenly become visible. "So tell us," Wing Commander Zal Neth demanded, with the directness her species used when abandoning diplomatic niceties. "Why did humans abandon dimensional manipulation technology?" The human's smile carried sadness older than stellar formation. "Because we got good at it. Really, terrifyingly good at it. Good enough to crack planets accidentally. Good enough to tear holes in space-time during domestic disputes. Good enough to realize that some capabilities are too dangerous to trust to human nature. But surely safeguards, began Lattice Prime. We built safeguards. Then we built safeguards for the safeguards. Then we had to build safeguards to protect us from the safeguards we'd built to protect the safeguards. The human's expression suggested someone recounting a recurring nightmare. Eventually, we realized the only effective safeguard was choosing not to build the weapons in the first place. Yet you carry one, pointed out the Krathen engineer. I carry one because sometimes the universe presents situations where the choice is between using ultimate weapons or losing everything worth protecting. The human's voice carried the weight of inherited responsibility. My family has been making that calculation for 3,000 years. We've used this axe exactly 7 times. The silence that followed allowed everyone present to contemplate what circumstances might justify deploying reality-warping weapons only 7 times across 3 millennia. What were those 7 times? Whispered whisper of distant thunder. Twice to stop wars that would have consumed entire solar systems. Once to prevent a plague that would have sterilized the galaxy. 3 times to seal dimensional rifts that other species accidentally opened. And once. He paused, looking directly at Commander Vex Thule, who had approached their table without announcement. Once to ensure that a certain military academy's survival scenarios didn't accidentally kill cadets carrying weapons they didn't fully understand. Vex Thule completed. The alien cadets stared at their instructor with expressions that suggested multiple species experiencing simultaneous existential revelation. You knew, accused Kex 9. You knew what that weapon was. I suspected, Vex Thule corrected. Human military advisors recommended we invite a representative to our advanced weapons program. They were unusually specific about which representative to invite and what he should bring. The entire scenario was staged? Asked the Vorthon. Not staged, the human corrected. Educational. There's a difference between teaching through deception and teaching through revelation. Wing Commander Zal Neth's crest flattened completely. What exactly were we supposed to learn? That advancement isn't always advancement. That newer isn't always better. That sometimes the most sophisticated response to complex problems is elegant simplicity. The human stood, gathering his meal tray. And that dismissing something as primitive without understanding it is the kind of arrogance that gets civilizations conquered by people carrying stone axes. He walked toward the exit, then turned back one final time. Your species are impressive. You've built weapons that can shatter moons, manipulate quantum fields, project force across dimensional barriers. But you've forgotten the most important question any weapons designer should ask. Which is, prompted Commander Vex Thule, not can we build this, but should we build this? The human's gaze swept across the assembled aliens one last time. Humans learned the hard way that the answer isn't always yes. Hopefully you won't have to learn it the same way we did. After he left, the mess hall remained quiet except for the gentle hum of life support systems recycling air that suddenly seemed to carry the weight of civilizations that had risen, peaked, and chosen their own paths forward. Outside the viewing ports, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the philosophical revolutions occurring within a military academy that had inadvertently become a classroom for wisdom rather than warfare. The betting pools, incidentally, had been replaced by something unprecedented in galactic history. A waiting list for a philosophy course taught by the Academy's most primitive student, who had somehow become its most advanced instructor without anyone noticing the transformation. Which, as any anthropologist specializing in human behavior could have explained, was exactly how humans preferred their most important lessons to be learned. Quietly, thoughtfully, and with the kind of delayed revelation that made you realize you'd been asking the wrong questions all along.